Hello everyone. It's often said that the unfortunate spend their entire lives trying to heal the wounds of their childhood. This highlights just how powerful an influence one's family and environment can have on their development. Numerous studies have shown that many criminals grow up in broken homes, deprived of moral guidance and proper emotional support, leading to psychological distortions and abnormal behaviors. The perpetrator in today's case is a prime example of such a background. He committed heinous crimes, violating and murdering countless innocent victims. He didn't even spare the elderly. People said he was nothing short of a wild beast. What kind of psychological trauma could twist someone into such a monster? Let's dive into today's story and find out. Lamb Quacwai was born in 1971 in Daxing Village, San Tin, Hong Kong. He came from an ordinary family with 6 siblings. Their living conditions were modest, and raising such a large family placed a constant financial strain on them. His father was a deeply unpleasant man. Not only was he addicted to gambling, but he also routinely beat and verbally abused his wife and children. Unable to endure the never-ending domestic violence, Lamb's mother eventually left the family. From that day on, Lamb's father became even more short-tempered and aggressive, constantly lashing out at Lamb and his siblings. These early experiences had a profoundly negative impact on Lamb's developing personality. He rarely interacted with other children and found comfort only in playing with cats and dogs. However, as he grew up under the influence of his father's violent tendencies, these animals eventually became his punching bags whenever he was in a foul mood. Watching them bleed brought him a twisted sense of satisfaction. Another major turning point came during his secondary school years. Lamb was expelled for getting into fights. After entering society, he initially tried to find a decent job and build a stable life. But without an education or qualifications, he was repeatedly rejected and looked down upon. These constant setbacks bred resentment and disillusionment. Soon, Lamb gave up entirely. He fell into a life of indulgence drinking, using drugs, running scams with triads, and using his good looks to hook up with troubled women. Among them was one woman he truly loved, a girl named Lily. After dating for about 2 years, Lamb even began thinking about marriage. But to his shock, Lily broke up with him, stole his money, and ran off with another man. The heartbreak from betrayal, combined with his tragic upbringing and rejection from society, completely shattered Lamb's sanity. He plunged headfirst into a world of darkness and crime. From that point on, he vowed to take revenge on society, especially on beautiful women. On April 24th, 1992, Lamb was feeling particularly lonely and restless. He was drinking heavily, wandering the streets in his car. As he drove aimlessly, a taxi suddenly appeared coming from the opposite direction. Through his blurred vision, he saw a young woman in the backseat of the cab. Her face and figure closely resembled that of his ex-girlfriend. In an instant, his loneliness vanished, fueled by alcohol and obsession. Lamb slammed his foot on the gas and began to follow her. Seeing the taxi slowing down, Lamb Quacwai parked his car a short distance away. After the taxi drove off, he watched as the girl stepped into a residential apartment building. Without hesitation, Lamb sprang into action. The girl was waiting for the elevator on the ground floor when he approached. Glancing around and seeing no one nearby, Lamb wrapped his arms around her neck from behind and began to strangle her. He dragged her into the stairwell next to the elevator, where he committed a vile act of sexual assault. Throughout the entire attack, he kept calling out his ex-girlfriend's name, unleashing all the rage he had built up inside. Only after venting all of his fury did he finally let the victim go. Before fleeing the scene, he took her money and jewelry. This was the first time Lamb had ever committed rape. The act gave him an overwhelming sense of satisfaction, despite also filling him with anxiety and unease after all. It was his first serious crime. For a while afterward, he lay low, staying indoors and avoiding attention. But when he realized no one suspected him, the dark urges returned. On June 26th, unable to suppress his cravings any longer, Lamb began hunting for another target. This time, He set his sights on a nightclub hostess he had been observing for some time. Her figure and demeanor reminded him of his mother, and for that reason, he chose her. He waited patiently outside the club until 3 p.m. When she finally emerged, the moment she stepped out, Lamb ambushed her, dragging her into the bushes where he raped her multiple times before quickly fleeing the scene. 2 months later, on August 22nd, 1992, Lamb struck again. In the early hours of the morning, he assaulted and raped a 39-year-old woman named Mac Ying, dragging her into the bushes just like before. 3 violent attacks in quick succession rapidly caught the attention of the local police, although the victims reported the crimes right away, and investigators were able to collect semen samples from the scenes. The fact that the assaults happened at night made it hard for the victims to clearly identify the perpetrator. All they could recall were vague details about his voice and hairstyle details too faint to be of much help. At the time, investigative methods were still outdated. Surveillance cameras weren't widely installed, and DNA technology had only just started to be implemented in Hong Kong. As a result, the police didn't have a sufficient database to match the samples and identify the suspect. Then, on December 4th, 1992, another woman was walking home late at night in the Tai Hang Yung neighborhood when someone suddenly grabbed her from behind, strangled her until she lost consciousness, and raped and robbed her while she was unconscious. Just a few weeks later, on December 28th, a woman was returning home from karaoke with her husband. Her husband had to leave early for work, so she walked home alone. On her way back, she was ambushed in the hallway of her apartment building, raped, and then fatally shot. 5 brutal attacks in a row left the residents of Sanpo Kong gripped with fear. The media began whispering the same ominous nickname, the Demon of Sanpo Kong. The bustling Tai Hang Yung neighborhood had now become shrouded in a dark and terrifying atmosphere. From elderly grandmothers in their 80s to young girls who hadn't even come of age, everyone lived in fear, afraid they might be the next target of the so-called Demon of Sanpo Kong. The pressure on the police had doubled. Night patrols were increased, and the department made a public promise they would catch the criminal as soon as possible. Through interviews with the victims, investigators concluded that all 5 attacks were the work of the same individual. In internal briefings, officers also noticed a pattern after each assault. The perpetrator would quickly use the victim's ATM card to withdraw cash from nearby machines. This led them to believe the criminal was intimately familiar with the area, likely a local resident. Moreover, the speed and precision with which he carried out his attacks and escaped indicated he couldn't possibly be traveling on foot. He had to have a vehicle. It was at this point that the taxi driver from the first incident came forward. He recalled seeing a white car following his taxi the night of the crime. This lead gave the investigation team a surge of hope. Identifying the make and imported Japanese white car and gathering partial plate number details allowed the police to narrow their list of suspects from thousands of vehicles down to just a few hundred. But while the police were still chasing leads, the killer struck again, this time escalating far beyond robbery and rape. Now, he had started to murder. At 4 a.m. on February 24th, 1993, the criminal selected a new target, a young woman riding alone in a taxi late at night. He tailed her silently through a chaotic street market, planning to wait until she entered her building, then strike when she went up the stairs. But unexpectedly, her boyfriend came downstairs to meet her. Lamb had no choice but to retreat into the shadows, silently watching. He wasn't ready to give up. He waited. Soon, another woman appeared, walking alone. Lamb quietly followed her and grabbed her arm, ready to assault her. But when he saw her face clearly, he was shocked. She was a middle-aged woman, around 50, and not someone who would go down without a fight. She immediately grabbed his ear, pointed a finger in his face, and began scolding him fiercely. Panicking, Lamb tried to run, but the woman held on tight, yelling at the top of her lungs, "I've caught a pervert." She punched and kicked him repeatedly, drawing attention to the scene. Enraged by the humiliation, Lamb lost control. He grabbed her by the hair and slammed her head into the wall, blood pouring down her face. Then he dragged her into the stairwell, stuffed a rag into her mouth, twisted her arms behind her back, pulled down her clothes, and raped her. Dawn was breaking. Elderly residents had begun their morning exercise routines, and students were making their way to school. Worried that someone might catch him, Lamb killed the woman before fleeing the scene. Before the police could make progress on that case, another one occurred. This time, again, it wasn't just a matter of rape and robbery. The victim was murdered. Lamb was not only a brutal criminal, he showed no regard for age or circumstance. Young or old, weak or strong, no one was safe from his violent path. On the night of April 14th, 1993, a 22-year-old woman returning home late was raped and robbed by him. The severity of his crimes was escalating rapidly, and as media coverage sensationalized the events, public fear reached a fever pitch. The police intensified their manhunt, even going so far as to deploy undercover female officers posing as potential victims in hopes of luring him out. But he wasn't easily fooled. To evade the growing pressure, he moved to live near his sister's house, but that didn't stop him from continuing his brutal crimes. At 4 a.m. on May 24th, 1993, he targeted and raped a 23-year-old karaoke singer named Liu Xiaomin. After the assault, he asked her to be his girlfriend. When she refused and slapped him across the face, rage consumed him. Unable to tolerate the rejection, he strangled her with his bare hands until she died. This act of cruelty ignited public outrage. The community was shaken, and the police knew they had to capture the killer and bring him to justice immediately. Then, on August 5th, 1993, he set his sights on yet another young woman, this time a 21-year-old. After sexually assaulting her, he went further. He threatened her, forcing her to give him her phone number and agree to go out with him. If she refused, he warned he would kill her entire family. Terrified, the young woman kept silent. She didn't dare tell her parents or anyone else. Fortunately, her older brother sensed something was wrong. He gently pressed her until she finally broke down and revealed everything. The family immediately reported the matter to the police. Just a few days later, when he arranged to meet the girl to see a movie, officers were already waiting. He was arrested on the spot. At first, he refused to speak, but realizing he couldn't escape the charges, he eventually confessed to the full scope of his crimes. Between April 1992 and August 1993, he committed a string of horrific acts. He sexually assaulted 9 women across various locations: Friendship Night District, Tai Hang Yung, Yikfeng Building, Hung Hoi Estate, and Beautiful Scene Street, and murdered 3 of them. DNA comparisons finally confirmed what investigators had come to suspect Lamb Quacwai was, without a doubt, the demon of San Po Kong, the man who had terrorized the district for over 14 months. In September 1994, the case went to trial, but Lamb Quacwai admitted only to 8 counts of rape and 7 counts of theft. He denied the 3 murder charges, stubbornly claiming that the killings had been accidental. His defense attorney brought in 2 psychiatrists to testify on his behalf. The doctors stated that Lamb Quacwai had grown up in a deeply dysfunctional environment, deprived of love, and subjected to abuse by his biological father. His withdrawn personality and unstable emotional development, shaped by that toxic upbringing, had led to his mental disturbance and, as they claimed, caused him to commit acts of rape and murder by accident. It was true that Lamb Quacwai suffered from psychological issues, but it couldn't be said that he was completely insane. Throughout the crimes he committed when threatening victims or later providing statements, he still demonstrated a certain level of cunning and self-awareness. During the trial, he behaved in a perfectly normal manner, showing that he was in control of himself. Therefore, the court concluded that he was not mentally ill in the legal sense, but rather suffered from a behavioral disorder. As such, he was to be held accountable under standard criminal law rather than receiving the special considerations reserved for those legally deemed insane. In the end, the jury found Lamb Quacwai guilty of 3 counts of murder. Although Hong Kong had abolished the death penalty in 1966, and its legislation on serious crimes had been revised in 1993, the brutal nature and sheer audacity of his offenses led the court to sentence him to 11 life terms in prison. Looking back at Lamb Quacwai's life, it becomes clearer how he evolved into such a monstrous figure. Much of it can be traced back to the environment in which he was raised. The absence of his mother and the physical abuse by his father warped his mental state and bred within him a deep-seated hatred and distorted view of women. This was undeniably a complex and harrowing case, one that required the court to balance the severity of the crimes with a fair and measured judgment. It demanded not only that the law speak with firm authority, but also that the deeper causes of the crimes be considered. Lamb Quacwai's family background may explain some of the reasons behind his actions, but they could never be accepted as an excuse or justification for such heinous crimes, regardless of the psychological or environmental causes behind criminal behavior. Anyone who breaks the law must face the consequences. Only by holding perpetrators fully accountable can society deter similar acts and safeguard its people.
In the heart of Chongqing, behind its seemingly peaceful and glamorous facade, silent crimes were taking place, destroying the lives of countless individuals. In 2011, a major case was exposed, shocking the entire public. A ruthless madam trampled on human rights to fulfill her dream of wealth and power. Even to this day, the victims of this cruel woman cannot forget the years of living in hell. She became known as the most powerful and notorious female crime boss in Chongqing, China. Wang Ziki was born into an ordinary family in Chongqing with 5 siblings. She was the 3rd child in the family. Due to the large number of children, their household struggled financially. One would expect that growing up in poverty would make children more understanding and willing to help their parents. But Wang's eldest brother was the opposite. He had no ambition and spent his days associating with gangsters. Eventually, he got involved in a violent fight that resulted in someone's death, and he was sentenced to death. Influenced by her brother's bad example, Wang was also far from a model student at school. With her striking appearance, she caught the attention of many young men around her. Thanks to her beauty and outgoing personality, she became the target of pursuit for many delinquents. Because of this, Wang saw beauty as a source of power. Later, she lost interest in studying, and in 1990, before even graduating high school, she and her younger sister, Wang Yuaning, opened a beauty salon on a busy street. Given their looks, the 2 sisters could have easily become the star faces of their beauty salon, making the business thrive. However, for some reason, ever since they opened, their salon remained deserted. Watching other beauty salons flourish with a steady flow of customers, the sisters couldn't help but wonder why there was such a big difference. Eventually, Wang secretly investigated and discovered that other salons didn't make money from selling beauty products but from special services. Taking advice from industry insiders, Wang quickly realized what was missing. After discussing with her sister, they decided to introduce these services into their own salon. She believed that this strategy would turn their business around. However, to their surprise, not only did they fail to make money, but they also suffered significant losses. After months of struggle, they had no choice but to accept the harsh reality. They could not sustain the business. Yet, in their hearts, they were filled with resentment. They had invested time, money, and effort, yet their earnings were no better than working for someone else. Despite their unwillingness to give up, reality was undeniable. Finally, the sisters decided to close the salon, find another job to make a living, and search for a different path to wealth. Just as they were discussing closing the shop, a mysterious couple appeared, an encounter that would change their fate forever, dragging Wang Ziki into an inescapable abyss. The woman, named Zhong Guangyu, was known in the underworld as Sister Zhong. She had been in the prostitution business for years and was highly experienced, well-versed in every trick of the trade. The man, named Tao Minggu, was known as a social butterfly, but in reality, he was nothing more than a man who lived off women. However, being surrounded by women all the time gave him an excellent understanding of their psychology, making him highly skilled in managing them. When the couple proposed a partnership with Wang, she didn't hesitate and agreed immediately. After all, her beauty salon wasn't making money, and the worst that could happen was still having to close it. She figured she might as well take a gamble and see what happened. And so, the four of them embarked on a path of illegal profit-making. What Wang didn't expect was that as soon as these two people joined, her salon suddenly became incredibly successful, attracting a flood of customers. With this, Wang and her sister made their first real fortune. Having tasted success, the two sisters began thinking even bigger. They wanted to expand on a larger scale and make even more money. The temptation of immense profits led the Wang sisters deeper into the criminal world. By the end of 1998, Wang had opened a tea house in the suburbs. At the time, tea houses were extremely popular, drawing in large crowds. Her tea house opened at 2 p.m., yet even by the early hours of the next morning, the lights remained on, and customers came and went endlessly. The waiting line downstairs stretched to hundreds of people, longer than the queue at a specialist doctor's office. To keep customers entertained while waiting, Wang even set up entertainment facilities such as poker rooms and billiards tables on the lower floors, turning the tea house into a well-known entertainment hotspot. Madam of Chongqing. After the success of her tea house, Wang continued to expand, gradually opening 8 more sex service establishments across the city. Once she had mastered the industry's core operations, her business flourished even further. Wang knew that to run a successful enterprise, she needed a stable customer base. To keep customers returning, there had to be something that captured their interest. And in this industry, what customers truly sought was novelty. But how could she create those new experiences? After much discussion, she and her sister devised a plan that could only be described as ruthless. They would recruit workers from job markets. The idea was in place, but executing it was not easy. Those seeking jobs were ordinary, decent people, and no one would willingly take on such work. Wang understood this, so she and her sister resorted to deception. They advertised high salaries and stable jobs to lure young, attractive women. Many of these women were still very young, inexperienced in life, and thrilled to have found what seemed like a good job, completely unaware that they were walking into a predator's den. Once inside, leaving was nearly impossible. Wang would find various excuses to confiscate their identification cards and phones, cutting off all their contact with the outside world. Without their documents, the women were rendered powerless, left with no choice but to be manipulated. Some of them tried to resist. This was where Tao Minggu's role became crucial. For first-time offenders, he would usually offer them a chance. He would lock them in a pitch-black room and deprive them of food for several days. However, for repeat offenders or those who refused to comply, he showed no mercy. At best, they were brutally beaten. At worst, their survival became uncertain. One of the most terrifying methods he used was the infamous iron bed, a name that sent chills down the spines of anyone who had heard of it. Anyone who refused to work or attempted to escape would be tied to this bed and subjected to beatings, even sexual assault. With these cruel tactics, Wang gained complete control over the women. As the business grew, Wang continued expanding, opening 9 more sex service establishments in the Yuzhong district of Chongqing. However, as her empire grew and the money flooded in, she also became a target of jealousy and resentment. This pushed Wang to seek protection for herself. She didn't just hire assassins to eliminate those who interfered with her business. She also built relationships with other crime bosses. Knowing that her work could never be public, she needed powerful figures to shield her operations. Besides offering hefty bribes, Wang secured protection by supplying beautiful women to high-ranking officers in the Chongqing Public Security Bureau, such as Deputy Director of Criminal Investigation Huang Daqiang and Deputy Director of Public Order Chen Dao. With these connections, Wang found the backing she needed. Under their protection, her tea house business thrived even more. Wang Ziqi's success was largely due to her workforce. According to unofficial reports, Up to 2,000 women were held captive in her establishments, with millions of customers passing through. The numbers were staggering. At this point, she had officially become the most powerful female crime boss in Chongqing, untouchable by any force. The nightmare of these women. Beyond physical threats, Wang and her accomplices treated these women with unimaginable cruelty. They operated under a fascist-like system of control. The women were confined in tiny, overcrowded rooms, with no proper beds or furniture, only a few bunk beds. At peak times, some women had no place to sleep and were forced to lie on the floor, barely surviving each day. During the day, they were locked in their rooms. At night, they were gathered and transported for work. Even during menstruation or after undergoing forced abortions, they were not allowed to rest. Their lives were utterly miserable. After each service, they were required to attend evaluation meetings. Every week, there was a major meeting. Any woman who broke the rules or received complaint from customers was punished on the spot. One woman, known only as Chu, had been beaten and tied up in the tea house for so long that she developed an extreme trauma response. Every time she tried to sleep, she had to tie her own hands and feet to feel at ease. Under prolonged, inhumane torture, her mental state completely collapsed. She eventually lost all sense of self-preservation and would automatically strip whenever she saw a man. This was just one example of the monstrous brutality Wang inflicted upon these women. There was another girl named Jun. When she realized she had been deceived, she pleaded to leave. However, this request immediately enraged Wang. Under immense pressure from her, Jun had no choice but to quietly accept her fate, just like the other girls. But the thought of escaping never left her mind. After 6 months, she finally found an opportunity. One night, she was locked alone inside a residential building. Overjoyed, she waited for the guard to leave before taking out a rope she had secretly prepared for a long time and attempted to climb down from the 8th floor. Unfortunately, the rope was too short, leaving her suspended in midair. Faced with no other choice, her survival instincts kicked in. She let go. When she woke up, she was told she would be paralyzed for life. But before she could even process the devastating reality of losing her ability to walk, Tao Minggu appeared. He threatened her, forcing her to say that she had simply fallen out of a window while cleaning, warning that if she told the truth, he would kill both her and her family. Terrified, Jean became their puppet, repeating the story they had fabricated. She thought that if she behaved well, they would eventually let her go. But she was wrong. Even in her paralyzed state, she was still not free. To cover up their crimes, Wang's gang illegally detained Jun for 6 years. She only regained her freedom when the police rescued her. During those 6 years, she was confined to a dark, windowless room, moving only by pulling herself along with a rope. The women were not only forced to live in unbearable conditions. Their food was often moldy or rotten. They were also subjected to mandatory training drills and escape rehearsals. Wang demanded that they be fully dressed within 25 seconds of hearing an alarm and follow a predetermined escape route. Some may wonder, if Wang and her gang were so confident that they were untouchable, why did they need escape drills? The truth was this was one of Wang's most cunning manipulations. These so-called escape drills were nothing more than a psychological tactic to brainwash the women. Sometimes, they were staged to seem incredibly real. Wang would have some of her men dress in police uniforms and pretend to arrest the missing girls, interrogating them. During these interrogations, if any of the women dared to confess the truth about their situation or try to ask for help, their punishment would be severe. At best, they were thrown into a dark room without food or water for days. At worst, they were subjected to brutal beatings. Because of these rehearsals, the women genuinely believed Wang had absolute power, even over the police, and that no one could help them. None of them realized that the entire scenario was an act, merely a way for Wang to test their obedience. Through these cruel psychological tricks, Wang maintained tight control over the women, proving just how ruthless she was. With these various tactics, Wang dominated Chongqing for 15 years, amassing a fortune worth hundreds of millions of yuan. The number of women she victimized could easily be in the thousands, while many others remain missing. Evil will be punished, but as the saying goes, those who do evil will pay the price. After 15 years of terror, the Chinese government intensified its crackdown on organized crime. With the downfall of Wang's protectors, she too was exposed. On the night of August 7, 2009, Chongqing police launched a massive raid with over 200 officers targeting Wang's tea house. Her criminal empire was dismantled, and 38 women, along with managers of various ranks, were arrested. However, unfortunately, Wang Ziqi, Wang Yuanning, and Tao Minggu managed to escape. Although they were not immediately captured, it didn't take long for the authorities to track their movements. Wang Yuanning had fled abroad early on, while Wang and Tao Minggu went into hiding in Shenyang after their tea house was shut down. On September 9, 2009, police arrested Wang and her accomplices at a shopping mall in Shenyang. By August 2010, the court publicly announced the verdict in the first trial related to the case. Wang Ziqi was sentenced to death, and all her personal assets were confiscated. Tao Minggu was also sentenced to death and permanently stripped of his political rights. Meanwhile, Wang Yuanning had fled China, hiding in countries like Austria and the Philippines. Chongqing police immediately issued an international red notice through Interpol. Eventually, with assistance from Philippine authorities, Ning was captured while hiding inside a fast food restaurant. On April 1st, she was extradited back to Chongqing to stand trial. For years, the Wang sisters showed no regard for the law, committing heinous crimes and forcing over 2,000 women into illegal activities. Countless women and rivals were brutally killed at their hands. Their crimes were beyond forgiveness. But as the saying goes, the net of justice is vast and tight. Though it may seem loose, no one escapes. On December 7, 2011, Wang Ziqi and her accomplices were executed. For 15 years, countless young women with dreams of a better future were tortured, exploited, and violated by Wang. Even after all these years, many survivors still cannot forget their days in that living hell. Some have never been able to rebuild their lives. Wang and her 3 accomplices not only trampled on these women's basic human rights, but also stripped them of their futures and hope. What are your thoughts on the infamous madam and crime boss, Wang Ziqi?